Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Heretic Hammer Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall, and this is my co-host, Dylan.
Hello, hello.
And we're going to start this episode with another quote today, Dylan. I know, we're just like Adeptus Ridiculous. Isn't that ridiculous?
Which Primarch is that?
None of them.
Oh, okay.
The image you're looking at currently is just a random.
Is he on the $10 bill or the $20 bill? I can't remember.
He's on the negative $10 bill.
Ooh. Oof.
All right. This excerpt. All I ever wanted was the truth. Remember those words as you read the ones that follow. I never set out to topple my father's kingdom of lies from a sense of misplaced pride. I never wanted to bleed the species to its marrow, reaving half the galaxy clean of human life in this bitter crusade. I never desired any of this, though I know the reasons for which it must be done. But all I ever wanted was the truth. This is the beginning of the Book of Lorgar and the beginning of our episode on the Word Bearers.
This is a good quote. Anytime somebody can get like a really effective use of the word marrow, I'm all about that.
One of the things, did you see the video I sent you yesterday of Macho
gosh.
Horus?
I never wanted this, yeah.
Yes.
See, because whenever I read this quote, it kind of reminds me of the Horus Heresy trailer, like the second edition like trailer where Horus starts it with like, "I never wanted this," and like this kind of because he kind of like says like that I never wanted this and whatever, but like, just the fucking I never wanted this. Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
I never wanted to send my legions. Yeah. So funny. To put it frankly, if truly anyone has won in 40k, it is almost certainly the Word Bearers.
Okay.
Because in a way, they kind of have gotten everything that they've wanted.
Nice.
And while that you may look at them and 40k and be like, why would you want this?
Mm-hmm.
Other than when Lorgar said he never desired any of this. There's a buildup to it, right? Because, you know, this is not to say that they are innocent or misunderstood, because they are not. They are like last week when we discussed the image of, I just want to be evil. Or I just want to make people into totally. Dinosaurs, Spider-Man. Yep. They decided that it's like they felt a betrayal and decided, fuck it. And here's the thing, right? While I don't agree with this mentality or this kind of aspect or whatever, there are a number of people in our world today, right now, when you go outside, who have decided that they instead will live exclusively for themselves. I know, touching grass, crazy. That like there are people though out there right now who live exclusively for themselves. They do whatever they want. They don't care about consequences. They live for themselves. They live for their desires. And a lot of times that is at the expense of other people, right? And turn on the news, you see that example time and time again. And here's the thing, right? We know the reasons that type of mentality, culture, and mindset exists. Now, you multiply that by like not only millions, but then even more oppressive circumstances. And you might be able to see why the Word Bearers would kind of be like pretty anarchic and selfish. Because in a way, they are a hyperbolic extension of the anarchic selfishness in all of us. with a little bit of Satanistic tendencies thrown in there.
Just give it a little spice.
Yeah, you know, you got to have some spice. I mean, this is 40K. The spice is the spice.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one lemon chicken with flakes of black pepper in it, and that's the Ultramarines. And even then, it's gotten a little bit of spice lately. But regardless, today we must talk about the word bearers. And first we must talk about Lorgar, because obviously the Primarch of the word bearers. And, you know, here's the thing, kind of before we get too deep into it here, the first thing I want to note with the word bearers is that kind of like, unlike the other legions that we covered, I kind of went through like the backstory of the Primarch, and then I kind of go into like the Legion itself and kind of then what they both did in the heresy, and then kind of what they're doing now or what they're doing without their Primarch in the case of the Blood Angels. You know, everything with the heresy is kind of similar to when we did it with Perturabo, where, you know, everything with the heresy is going to really be tied to Lorgar, but, you know, it's going to be less about like, here's all the antics they did, because like they're in so much shit. Like they are one of the titular villain characters and enemies of Warhammer 40k. In fact, in the original Dawn of War series, all of the campaign Chaos Space Marines, save Soulstorm, were all word bearers. And then it became Black Legion in 2, and it was Alpha Legion for whatever reason in Soulstorm, but that's a whole thing. But regardless, you know, this kind of whatever. The Lorgar and the word bearers are so innately tied together, and there's so many battles that it's just like, I'd rather get into all the things that Lorgar did and a number of the things, not all, a number of the things that Erebus did. Because they're very tied to the hip, and they're both very important for all the things that made 40K what it is now. So, the first start here, this is a rare time where I get to show you the picture of the adoptive father of the Primarch. So today we get to say Lorgar was founded and raised by Corferon. And he was an outcast of the Covenant of Colchis.
Okay.
Now, Colchis, the planet that Lorgar landed on, was this kind of arid, deserty planet. And pretty much the entirety of the people on the planet, amongst the other cities and whatnot, had all kind of joined into this idea of this covenant, and they worshiped the gods called the Powers. And Corferon believed that Lorgar was blessed by the Powers. Now, in terms of like, you know, type of religious world we live in, right? Because, you know, for example, in our society today, right, in 2025, you know, one of the, like in one of the most inherently popular religions in the world being Catholicism, you know, today you would look at Catholicism and you're kind of like, you know, there's a lot of, you may not believe this, but I can attest to some of this, that there's actually a fair amount of acceptance happening currently in the church movement. We're looking more like 300 AD level Catholic Church.
Sure, yeah.
In terms of this society on Colchis, where very much the opposite.
It's more what I was thinking of.
Yeah. Not today. We're not getting today's Catholic Church. We're getting more like, crusades. And this is kind of reflected by Corferon's treatment of Lorgar, where very early, despite that he believed that Lorgar was not only blessed by the Powers, but that he would be essentially kind of some type of arbiter, or like, I don't want to say Messiah, because that's not really right of what he believed, but kind of, right? And, so, he made sure to take good care of Lorgar by being horribly emotionally and physically abusive to Lorgar while growing up. Like a good parent would do.
Yep. Absolutely.
And here's the thing that's important to keep in mind is that emotional and mental and physical abuse that he lays on Lorgar is very important to keep in mind, because of two things. The reality is, it's a little bit of an early spoiler, but it's going to become very obvious very fast, is the powers that they worshipped were actually, unbeknownst to any of them on Colchis, the four chaos gods. They didn't recognize them as specifically just four gods, and they didn't recognize them as what they were. They just knew that they were the powers they believed were these gods that, divined their creation and will and being and all sorts of things. And the important thing to also mention with this is that the chaos gods were not as potent in real space as they are in current setting. While not fully explained reasons were if it was just they were holding back, or were they just trying to were they trying to keep it under wraps, or was it specifically through the actions of the Horus Heresy that they gained more, even more of a hold in real space? But they this wasn't a scenario where right now in 40k, even if you unbeknownst to yourself worship the chaos gods, you could end up with a mutation or a demon coming through your soul to, wreak havoc on your friends and family. That didn't happen. That wasn't a thing.
Mm-hmm.
The people were, it was kind of now where it's if you go to church, it's not an angel is escaping out through your mouth, burning everyone in the church alive, and then being but be not afraid. That's some real Bible level referencing I'm doing there. Anyway, so it was just they went to church, they went home, and they felt, if anything, maybe sometimes they felt empowered, and that could be from the chaos god's will, that could just be from self-fulfilling prophecy. But regardless, that was the state of things at the time in all of the real space in this kind of Great Crusade pre-era, So as he grew up, Corferon continued to manipulate Lorgar, so to not only just kind of make him loyal to him, but essentially Corferon's goal was to raise Lorgar in this extent so that, it would kind of help raise his stature, because he was an outcast, right? Mm-hmm. So he wanted Lorgar here to become studious, to really become a learner and be prominent in society. And this actually ended up kind of becoming the case a bit, because first of all, he has saved Corferon multiple times, because he, one way or the other, did feel a compassion and care for, even though it was a toxic relationship, his adoptive father nonetheless. And as he grew up and actually became quite popular, Lorgar would receive a great amount of jealousy towards him, as many saw his kind of charisma as a threat. And if, because especially we're calling more back into that Crusades, medieval era church, there was a lot of cardinals and there's a lot of politic happening in Rome, if you will. Mm-hmm. So there was no different here. But in this time, Lorgar began to see visions of a bronze armored giant and a cyclops with a blue cape, essentially coming to save his people, right? And he began preaching of a one true God that would visit them, and it was called the One. This obviously allowed for rivals to act on Lorgar, calling him a heretic and saying, "Oh my God, this guy doesn't believe in the powers. Fuck him."
If he discovers the one true God, sweet, awesome. It's not the Emperor. Wait, what? What are you talking about? Huh?
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. This allows though for rivals to be like, hey, this is, because remember, this is before, they don't even know the Emperor is around yet, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
We're pre-Crusade. He hasn't even arrived. But remember when I talked about how Primarchs often would have this sense of the existence of their brothers and the Emperor. So he saw these visions as God, the one, their God, the one, or his God, that would come and save them, and that this was the new light, and that the powers their old hat, gotta get them out of here. And so rivals obviously took him as a heretic and were like, no, look at this guy, get him arrested. Well, unfortunately, he was a charismatic and powerful guy. And he and his followers were able to not only defeat those that would try to arrest him, but essentially had gained such a massive following that effectively was able to then wage war on those who, and like essentially through force or whatever, or preaching, convert more people and cities to their religion, to their cult. And in one of the final cities, Lorgar would kind of essentially pull a Moses. The city had like a dark age of technology, like storm generator. And they used it like as a shield because like if you went into it, essentially the wind, the storms, electricity, you would be obliterated one way or the other, right? Torn by winds, electrocuted, whatever it may be. However, through not fully explained memes that I could see, he essentially is able to literally part the storm. And when people in the city see this, they not only like, as the army kind of heads towards the walls of the city, the storm not only then ends, but then the people in the city present the heads of their leaders as gifts to Lorgar.
Oh,
because they're like, holy shit, no, he's the real, because they see the storm thing, right? He pulls the Moses and they're like, oh shit, he's the real deal.
He's got the sauce.
Yeah. So at this point, inevitably, like through the kind of populace of the cities, which there's not a full number to it at this point, but about a third of the people would be killed by Lorgar's there was, amongst a number of the leaders and certain followers, a third of them would be killed by Lorgar's most trusted fanatical warriors in the Great Purge. A number of those warriors would end up becoming important to him later on. But it was only months after this final success and this final city was taken that the Emperor would descend, and unfortunately to his chagrin, they would see him as a god and the savior that he had proposed. And here's the reason why it all fit. He came with Magnus, who wears a blue cape. So thus,
right,
a large man in gold and a cyclops in a blue cape, have descended onto Colchis.
Okay.
And that's the thing, right? So part of the getting real explanation for this is he, like many of his brothers, was seeing visions of the Emperor's entering, but due to the religious upbringing and all of that, he took it as a biblical sign, if you will. However, before we get into the crux of the Great Crusade here, we need to talk about a different man. This is in the wrong spot, but I'll get back to this later. We need to talk about Erebus.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So let's. I want you to really listen to the sentence I'm gonna say. The wiki worded it this way, Lexiconum worded this way, and I really liked the way that it worded this, so I kind of just like wanted to utilize it as it was written in the Lexiconum. The boy that would become Erebus was born to common parents on Colchis, and even at a young age felt it was his purpose to manipulate, deceive, and sow discord. I would like to ask you, does anything sound strange about why the way I said that sentence, or like the words in that sentence?
Well, saying that the man who would become Erebus, I've heard that phrasing used before in literature, but
Sure.
if you were to take it literally, it would suggest that he had like a different name or identity before actually being Erebus.
As his parents often scolded him for his behavior and lack of achievement, they compared him often to the village's pride, a religious and studious child named Erebus. So to be more like, to take his parents' words to heart, to be more like Erebus, the boy strangled him with a carrot and replicated Erebus's facial tattoos.
All right. I'm glad I was locked in for that. I'm glad I nailed that right away.
Just a shitlord from the jump.
Wow.
And then he took Erebus's identity and then he departed his village and became an aspiring priest for the Covenant of Colchis. Yeah, man, like from the jump, this guy was just like, I just have it in me. I want to be it. You know, they always say like people aren't born evil. He was born evil.
He was born with it. Maybe it's Erebus.
Yeah, he was born with it.
Yeah. You know what they say?
So,
if you can't beat them, choke them and assume their identity.
Here's the thing, though. Erebus, unfortunately, is still the piece of shit that he is. And so he's not great at studying or likes studying because everything about him is taking the shortcut. You know, like he wanted people to respect him. So he just killed and replaced himself as Erebus, you know, shit like that. So like, that's the shortcut instead of, you know, working on yourself and becoming a better person. So he wasn't very engaged in the material that the Covenant was teaching. However, one day he saw his face reflected into 4 parts of a cracked mirror. And it was in this point that he kind of was able to see in the reflections of the mirror that the powers that they had been looking at and that they had been talking of were in fact the ruinous powers, the 4 chaos gods. And it was in this point that he had realized that they had always been with him, guided his actions, and that he was their true arbiter. He is their will made manifest. And so then when the Covenant of Colchis fell to Lorgar, he like Erebus and a number of the followers and whatnot kind of went into hiding for a bit and then just kind of like eventually reemerged themselves as like acolytes of the Primarch. The thing was, Erebus never made like a crazy big name for himself, at least not to like clearly be like, yo, I remember that guy, kill him. You know, like,
Yeah.
So it was kind of the luck of his timing, you know, that like he hadn't like, cause he wanted to be like, you know, big, rich and famous. Right. Like, so it was kind of in a luck that he hadn't gotten that far yet, but it was like just enough that he could like, he felt the need to escape, but not like enough where like they would already know. So then he he just kind of comes out and he's just like, yeah, the one, Lorgar's my guy. And just, that's kind of like, and then he just kind of raises his way through the ranks that way. becomes more and more getting closer and closer to Lorgar. By the time the Emperor then arrived, Erebus had fully realized that he was going to be what is called the anathema, which is, from the eyes of the Chaos Gods, at least as a name, the one who would lay low and defeat the Emperor, whether this means literally or just through scheming. It would be through Erebus's design that the Emperor would be defeated. So here's a big thing about the word bearers, though, right? In the Great Crusade, the Emperor, despite that they were pretty clear about it from the jump, the Emperor never kind of fully or clearly told Lorgar to cut the crap when it came to his worship. And this was kind of largely, I must sound a little heretical here for a moment, bear with me. Largely because the Emperor was a conceited dumbass and made the assumption that it was just a word bearer's thing. That it was just like a word bearer's thing, and like they wouldn't try to convince every planet they took to join their cult. Kind of just like thought it would pass, I guess. And that Lorgar would see the imperial truth, which by just technicality, the imperial truth is just that there are no gods, there is no religion, that people are the ones who design and deign their destinies and all that, right? That's the imperial truth. That is the doctrine. That is imperial law. And Lorgar was technically consistently breaking that law. But that's what the Emperor continually tried to instill into Lorgar. He is not a god. Like the Emperor himself, he is not a god. There are no other gods. The powers are not real either. That aspect is the thing to hold on to, is that was what the Emperor would constantly try to press upon Lorgar. But I think he just kind of took the whole thing as what it was. He's like, I got other shit to do, whatever. It's not, as long as it doesn't lead to problems. Unfortunately, it led into one problem, which was that they were slow. They took planets and then converted them, which meant they spent time on the planets that they would take over. And the Emperor had a timetable, right? So he wanted Lorgar to be putting in. But here's the problem. Because he was turning these planets to the cult of the Emperor, this obviously laid all the seeds for what now is the fully ingrained imperial doctrine that exists for worshiping the Emperor in 40k. So like he tried to cull it from the top, but the problem is Lorgar had already planted so many seeds that it was inevitably going to come back. Now, much like the Emperor, and the rest of the Imperium, especially in 40k, when it finally started to impact his bottom line, the Emperor got involved. And, kind of much like a classic American corporation mentality, was like, I'm going to make an example of somebody instead of actually trying to deal with this, maturely and in a way that would actually lead to the betterment of both parties involved. He decided instead, I'm going to bomb their version of Jerusalem and then bring Gilliman along to do said bombing, and then have Gilliman stand there along with Malkador while I personally reprimand Lorgar in front of his entire legion, informing him that the mission of the Space Marines was for battle, not faith. And then in front of not only many of the Ultramarines, the Emperor and Malkador, would force Lorgar and his entire legion to kneel before him, obviously humiliating the Primarch. And again, mind you, up to this point, Lorgar had not received, other than like the initial Imperial doctrine thing, no extra warnings to be like, cut it out. So I think, like, looking at it, you could see why he would feel this kind of sense of betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
Because he had kind of been getting this light gas up that, like, no, you're good to do what you're doing, you know? And now he's being told not only everything he knows is a lie and that he's in fact not doing a good job, but then that the Emperor would destroy what they built, and that he has to be truly subservient to the Emperor, not working with the Emperor, right? It's not like, yeah, you're in charge, but we're together on this. It's, no, I'm just your whipping boy, you know? And he already been somebody's whipping boy, and I don't think he was necessarily ready for it to be somebody he just met, where Corferan at least still raised him. So it was thus through this that both Erebus and Corferan, who at this point, both of them, so including Corferan, had converted to chaos worship, in secret, obviously, were now able to slowly begin poisoning Lorgar into the mind and idea of going to chaos. And so in part of this, there was a number of failed attempts of Lorgar to get answers on the nature of the universe, right? He wanted to know about the potential powers that be and what forces are out there. And he sought to get this answer from Magnus, could not receive it. And so Lorgar decided to go on a pilgrimage of his own. He wanted to discover the truth for himself. And Lorgar's kind of subtle psychic abilities, which is, by the way, how he did the storm thing, lured him to a newly discovered world of Cadia.
Oh, yeah, Cadia.
Yeah, here's the fun part about Cadia. So, you know, we know Cadia at the moment, right, as the Imperium's first line of defense, or at least it was, and home of the most loyal, regimented, and well-equipped guard of almost all of Imperial space, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
It was a straight-up chaos planet. When they found it, it was just essentially a giant chaos cult planet. Kind of like Colchis in a way, because they didn't... But they knew it. Actually, I think the difference was that they knew it. But it was here that Cadia heard, on Cadia, it was that Lorgar heard a voice calling for him. And there he would encounter Ingethel, who, as a part of a kind of portion of talking to Lorgar, would also then become Ingethel the Ascended. And it was in this that Ingethel would show him the primordial truth of the universe. Now, if you're ever looking in a book or anything 40k related, and you see the phrase primordial truth, that is essentially just another name for the chaos gods.
Okay. Primordial truth, that means chaos gods.
Yes. So the idea, essentially, the conflicting ideals were imperial truth, there are no gods. Primordial truth, for chaos gods. And as a kind of above board note, the reason why the imperial truth was there, because like as we know, obvious, and like because of the kind of semi dealing / kind of workarounds and all that, that the emperor did with the ruinous powers, he was obviously well aware of their existence. But the idea of the imperial truth was to actually lessen the powers of the chaos gods. To make everyone believe there are no gods would then stifle or like kind of stifle the power of the chaos gods. Right. That was the idea. And that's why he had the imperial truth.
Sure.
Now, this kind of has a little, this like discovery and whatnot, you know, or sorry. So it was in this point that Ingethel convinced Lorgar that humanity had to accept and welcome the gods of chaos. And failing to do so would have their race share the same fate as the Eldar. Because essentially, I think from what I kind of, I mean, this is a whole book, right? Like, I mean, there's multiple books, I think, in some regard. The thing about this, if I remember correctly, it's like part of it is that, they are essentially, like they were trying to essentially, they were showing like all the hubris that the Eldar did to make Slaanesh. And I think the idea was that in going through all of the stuff with, the Great Crusade, it would essentially just turn the Emperor into some horrid being and it would lead to the death of all humanity, right? Now, the final thing that he would then get is a horrifying vision of the future. The hint that you're given is that it was the Emperor on the Golden Throne. And it was through this that he was converted to the ruinous powers. But we were never given an actual description of what that vision is. And this is kind of where it's like, it kind of seems like it's meant to be seen as like kind of maybe a trick. Because here, like, while it's very clear, relatively clear that Lorgar wanted to be, wanted to kind of come to the conclusion of disposing the Emperor and not having him be in charge, right? At the same time, you could look at it potentially being this, a vision of the Emperor on the Golden Throne and thinking, and they're tricking him and showing, hey, here's what will actually happen, but we're going to pretend and say, if the Emperor wins, this is what will happen, and or if like the Emperor isn't stopped, this will happen. And, then Lorgar's initially trying to join with the idea that he's actually going to save the Emperor. But I think it's more likely in that point that he saw the Emperor on the Golden Throne and thought, good. Because I think he was, I think he was explicitly that pissed. Right. Because again, he had been the Emperor had constantly been telling him, there are no gods. There are no gods. And now he had 4 gods talking to him directly saying, here is what will happen. And he's just like, you know what? I see the truth that I always knew, that there are powers out there, that there are beings that have shaped the worlds that we live in some way, shape, or form. And that worship can do good things, and that worship can work for you. And he, in talking to these 4 gods, kind of had all the truth that he needed. And that the Emperor was no such god. He didn't even want the worship. Now, the other kind of last thing he someone sees is like, sorry. Like I said, like some of it, it's in that part of that last thing is like, it's if chaos lost. So I don't know if part of it is also meant to end up being that like he also maybe just saw like he saw what the Emperor would, maybe they did at some point show him, here's what the Emperor will do if he wins. And they kind of knew like he's not going to like it because it's going to be this like total atheistic society where there are no gods. And therefore, and let's be real, it would have been like this horrid authoritarian regime as it was anyway, where people were treated like shit. So like all they had to show was that, and no gods. And Lorgar probably be kind of pissed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because he's pretty religion coded, you know. So if he saw that there could be no gods and no religion and people are treated like shit, that'd probably just be 2 steps too far. Like, it'd be one thing if there's religion and they're only kind of treated like shit. It's another if you have neither, if they're both treated like shit and there are no gods. So he may have even just looked at the real conclusion of what could have happened and thought, no way, I don't want this. And so, yes. So then in one of the final things, he would talk to the greater demon, Kairos, faced Reaver. And in a rare time where both heads would both speak truths, they would tell him that he would either have to attempt to slay Gilliman and set aside his pride, or slay Gilliman and get, you know, essentially the revenge for Monarchia.
Mm-hmm.
Or set his pride aside to help Horus win the heresy, but it would be without the glory over Gilliman. And they were both correct. This would be the choice he would have to make. He would either have to do one or the other. I think a part of it is that he wouldn't realize how he would do this. But since we know how Horus goes through, we kind of know an answer here. Which one he chose. But again, it wasn't necessarily in a completely obvious way, I think. So we'll skip over a lot of things when we actually get into the heresy now. But this is essentially the Lorgar is kind of a shitter arc begins. You know, obviously at this point it should be noted, Erebus gave the king on, that gave the king the anathane blade that would eventually gravely wound Horus, and then it would also be Erebus who would take him to a quote unquote healer that would lead to his chaotic visions that would then see him turn traitor. It is now from here that Corferon attempts to break the Ultramarines and take the planet of Calth. Now, while not technically Lorgar, this would end up fulfilling that first warning of Fate Weaver. It is, while not by Lorgar's hands himself, because the word bearers took this mission to defeat the Ultramarines, it would lead to the other truth, which is that by not doing so, Horus would fail. However, yes. So while they started seemingly what showed with promise, they were not successful. And thus later, Lorgar did have to go with Angron to engage in what was called the Shadow Crusade. And this is what would create the warp storms that would block the Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and Ultramarines from getting back and sending messages to Terra. So this is that whole sequence where there's the big warp storm around those planets. You know, they made, the Imperium Secundus. They weren't sure what was going on with the Imperium. And this is like getting to the start of the Siege of Terra. All kind of that stuff.
Okay.
But the issue here is that Lorgar would really dislike the fact that Horus did not fully believe in the dark gods. And he would attempt, he would attempt to, he would force Fulgrim to work with him on this and attempt a coup on Horus, as he felt like somebody who is truly worshiping of the chaos gods should lead the Siege of Terra and the rest of this thing home. However, this ended up being unsuccessful because even though Fulgrim was kind of bound because Lorgar used the true name of Fulgrim, so the demon part of him, because he's the demon snake man now. It's kind of like when you become a demon, you get a demon name. He found his demon name, right? And so he controlled him. He could essentially control him. And so he Fulgrim, though, wasn't much help, luckily, and for Fulgrim's sake. And the coup would be unsuccessful. So Horus would banish Lorgar, only leaving a set number of about, I think it was 5,000 word bearers that were loyal to Horus specifically to engage in the siege of Terra. And thus Lorgar would head off to create his own plans, but after the failure of Horus at Terra, he would lose Colchis to the Loyalists. It explodes. And flee to the Eye of Terror. However, when they fled, they were actually able to reconvene with Cor Pharon, where after his failure at Calth, had made a home for the word bearers on the planet of Sakaris. It's not after this then long after this then that Lorgar would make himself into a demon prince.
Like you do. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, if any of them were going to turn themselves into a demon prince, right? It'd be Lorgar.
Yeah.
Like,
makes sense.
Yeah. He's all in on the chaos shit already, right? Like, so, Lorgar's big thing, though, after the heresy is that he would end up getting hunted by a morphed version of Corvus Corax on Sakaris. Because having gone into the Eye of Terror, Corvus would get kind of affected by the warp. We'll kind of talk about this another time, but this would seemingly kind of give him the ability to shapeshift himself into this kind of like literal shadow, but like a crow shadow. Description's kind of funky. He would, though, like I said, these two would end up dueling, Lorgar and Corax, and the fight between them was not close. Corvus kicked the shit out of Lorgar. Here's the thing, like during the heresy, from like a physical standpoint, Lorgar kind of gets his ass beat pretty easily, pretty consistently, even. And this continued with Corvus Corax. And it was in escaping that when like Lorgar escaping, that Corvus would pledge that he now had his scent and he would hunt him down. However, it would have to come for some time. As for granted, in warp time, it may not be as long, but in real space years, it would be about 10,000 years before supposedly after Lorgar, exiled himself to study. Rumors have been spreading that he is somewhere active in the galaxy, but just unseen from the main stage of the lore. We must get into the Dark Apostles. Lorgar is in exile for a long time. Just a short while. It's a short 10,000 years,
What's 10,000 years to a demon anyway?
Yeah. So there are those, though, but here's the thing. The word bearers stayed together pretty tightly as a legion. And in fact, they, near the end by the time of their exile, were probably nearly about 100,000 Marines. So there was a good number of them. And, to first of all get into it, I should note Erebus, being the solo little shit that he is, had taken part in the siege of Terra in various ways. However, the reality is I would want to save that type of talk for a fuller episode on Erebus, as everything about him deserves a whole episode.
Okay.
Just all of his antics, the things that make him kind of like a perfect villain. He gets his own after school
special. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's just like a perfect villain,
Mm-hmm.
But it is worth noting that he was at the Siege of Terra and left with Abaddon at Horus's demise and failure. However, it was in here that he would, I believe, be a founding member, but essentially join the Dark Council with a number of Dark Apostles. Now, the Dark Council lead the Word Bearers Legion in the absence of Lorgar. And many Dark Apostles are impassioned and charismatic creatures capable of causing entire regiments of Imperial Guard or even Loyalist Space Marines to defect to the forces of chaos. These are those worm tongue kind of dudes, like, I mean, with Guard, you just need like the one good guy to come and be like, yeah, fuck those guys. They're making you work to your bones. Join us and fight back. Like, it's a lot easier with the normies versus the Space Marines, but like,
Yeah, you just be like, hear me out. And they're like, yeah, I guess we'll hear him out. Okay.
I mean, fuck it, dude. It's better than eating corpse starch. But, so thus they then have the council has the power to elevate the first acolyte of a host to the rank of Dark Apostle. So a leader of essentially a chapter, if you will. To Dark Apostle, and then thus the apostles themselves are said to have the power to pluck the souls of those who have failed them from the warp and torment them endlessly for eternity.
Oh, what a good power to have.
Yeah, like I said, man, through this worship comes power. So the thing is, Dark Apostles stem from chaplains, if you will, right? That thing that our best friend in Space Marine 2 is.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I thought about going over chaplains in this episode, but I would rather do an actual like real chaplains episode. But the thing about it is technically the chaplains exist because of Lorgar. But the other part, it's because of the Council of Nicaea. Now, in the Horus Heresy, for a good chunk of time, kind of everybody, a lot of chapters kind of got rid of their chaplains, through an airlock, got rid of. But obviously there were chaplains thus amongst the word bearers. And those chaplains who had a special Crozius Arcanum, which is a very powerful weapon, obviously with the word bearers, stuck around. And not only that, then they became quite powerful into becoming these Dark Apostles. So as apostles, they still carry their Crozius, but now an accursed Crozius. And, they have kind of turned them to now that these icons grant them protection from their enemies and just allowing them to channel this deeper connection with denizens of the warp. Woo!
Hooray!
The Dark Council and the Dark Apostles there's actually a book series kind of about them to kind of let you see into the politics a little bit, but also just into the type of warmongering they do. It's in an omnibus called the Word Bearers Omnibus, but then it is a 3-book series starting with what is called Dark Apostle and then Dark Disciple, and I forgot the third book's name because I didn't write all the books here. But they're fightable and they're very good. One of the things, actually, the funny thing, one of the things that hooked me into just because I was, edgy tween who liked emo stuff and all that when I was getting into 40k. My cousin told me that the author, Anthony Reynolds, in order to write get in the mood and write the stuff for that trilogy, that he had wrote a lot of a bit of the material just in a dark cave. I don't know if that's true. I want it to be.
For the omnibus specifically?
Well, yeah, those books,
Yeah.
At the time they were just each coming out one at a time, but
okay.
Yeah, that's what my cousin had told me at the time. This was years and years and years ago. So I don't know if it's true, but I hope it is.
I mean, did they also work at Nintendo? Because if they did, then we can count on that to be real.
I don't think my cousin did, no.
Oh,
He was 15 at the time.
Well,
Yeah, do I know? All right, so let's get a little bit into word bearers in 40k. I mean, technically, the Dark Apostles and whatnot are in 40k, both more general. So, at this point in 40k, the word bearers are like the quintessential warp wielders. Like I know, like in our world, we have the quintessential gamer. Well, they have the quintessential warp wielders.
And that's a 1-for-1 comparison, really.
Yeah, I mean, and so they utilize a large number of sorcerers, demons, demon engines, and possessed. The possessed are Marines who have allowed themselves to be possessed, as the name implies.
Sure, makes sense.
To show their devotion to their chaos god of choice or gods, and also to gain the unearthly power that demonic possession can have. So the majority of the time, however, the possessed retains control over his actions. The demon never permanently displaces the mortal mind of the Marine. However, through this, the possessed do forego any form of ranged weaponry, and they rely solely on the demonic gift provided by the possessing warp entity. Look at him. Would you not call those gifts? And here's the thing. So the first which you are seeing here, in the mouth? The first which you are seeing here are the Gal Vorbak. They were the word bearers of the Serrated Sun chapter, and they were the ones who, as far as I kind of remember, they were like the first ones to actually go and meet Ingathel, but essentially, and then they like kind of like sent word for Lorgar to come down. But like, I think the main thing is essentially they were part of that initial group that were out there with Ingathel, Lorgar and all that. And through the whole experience that Lorgar went through, they all essentially went through their experience and became these possessed. They willingly submitted themselves for this kind of superhuman abilities. And their first notable action was fighting against the forces in the Dropsite Massacre. However, unfortunately for them, the original members will all end up getting wiped out battling the Custodes and technically Corvus Corax. There was technically one survivor, but and he forms kind of like the next. It was like something else Vorbak, but more importantly, like it begins the trend of possessed. And one of the tricks with it sometimes is that possessed are obviously not perfect. And one of the things with it is that they're not always necessarily consensual. So either sometimes, it's just short-sightedness and the Marine just kind of tends to regret sometimes kind of the deal that they've done. Other times, though, it is kind of that realm of like, they are just kind of told, hey, you're going to do this thing. And they're like, okay. And then, oops, now there's a demon in you. The other times is also that they're just kind of driven. And when they go into battle, they kind of lose themselves to the demon. And then they do things that they don't like that they did. So it's a tricky mistress sometimes. The Dark Acolytes are pretty obviously active in their forces. However, they love to make heavy use of cultist forces, especially as big old meat shields. And then also to fabricate the many rituals for many dark means. The thing is like, so unlike, because the thing with them and kind of their sorcerers, right, is kind of unlike the Thousand Suns, right, where they, even Black Legion sorcerers are often Thousand Sun sorcerers that are just kind of like on loan. The sorcerers with the word bearers are often not like, kind of your, like, they're not always naturally born psychers, right? This is actually a thing where like in 40k, it's kind of like the opposite of D&D, right? So in D&D, a sorcerer is one born with innate magical ability, right? And through some bloodline. And, you know, they can just kind of like start shooting spells, you know, at many points in their life, just kind of randomly even sometimes, you know? The wizard has to sit there and train and hone their powers and learn the magic, right? In 40k, it's kind of the opposite, right? Like sorcerers, chaos sorcerers, are kind of like wizards, where especially like the ones that are not like Thousand Sons ones, you know, they're kind of like wizards. They have to go to the gods, beseech them for power, or like the beginnings of their power, and then they have to work really hard to hone it so that it doesn't just immediately consume them. You know,
okay.
like,
Yeah.
because remember, all psychic power, whether it's innate or not, is attached to the warp, and the warp is unequivocally tied to the chaos gods now because of the war in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, they're like, I want to wield this power, but they have to do a kind of a lot of training to make sure it doesn't immediately consume them.
Yeah.
Wherein a psyker is born with that, and like a Thousand Sun sorcerer is born with it. And while they will train and hone it to become more deadly and whatnot, you know, they start with the powers and then can hone it from an early age. So it's kind of funny. So it's kind of flipped, right? The guys looked at as wizards actually kind of are more like sorcerers, and the guys like called sorcerers are more like wizards.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, that is most of it when it comes to learning about the word bearers. They obviously have taken part. Like I said, like there are so many battles that I could have talked about, but like it's like, hey, this is already as long as it is, you know. And granted, I actually made for pretty good time, but like writing this out, I was like, oh my God, there's so much here. You know, there's so much potential detail. The characters have so much to them. I was like, I gotta condense this, you know. And Calth is important, right? Like we didn't talk about Calth a lot, and I went pretty fast over it, but like it was important in the Great Crusade, right? Because it was the main thing that kept the Ultramarines going there, right? Like when I said Lorgar, you know, like kind of went, you know, didn't necessarily know or realize, or probably didn't realize that he was choosing the unsuccessful route for Horus by dealing with Calth, that like Fate Weaver played out for him, because Corferon was the one going there. Part of it was that was just his assignment, you know, like Horus wanted him to help stall the Ultramarines, because the others were helping to stall the Dark Angels and the Blood Angels. And that was all relevant because Lorgar had to man the Shadow Crusade in order to whip up the Warp Storm. But like if the Ultramarines weren't dealing with shit, then it'd be a problem. And I mean, Calth for the Ultramarines is incredibly important, but this isn't the Ultramarines episode, right? Because I mean, Calth will get, you know, first we're going to get what's referenced in, I always forget both of their names, but but one of your companions in in Space Marine 2, you know, he mentions that he was a child on Calth, because I don't know if you know this, but with the Primaris project, the thing was they like grabbed, for the first Primaris Marines, they like grabbed a bunch of like kids that like young teens and kids that they would usually turn to make Space Marines, but instead put them in the Primaris pods and all that. It was going to be the next step in Space Marines and the whole thing. Then the Horus Heresy happened and it ruined everything. But like, that was the thing. That's why he was at Calth, because then he was taken,
Chiron's the
put
one
in
that
a
was,
pad.
Chiron's the one that was born on Calth, right? Because it's Chiron and Galadriel.
Yeah, and Gadriel, we don't know much about his like background. But you know, but yeah, so he like, that was the thing. Yeah. So like he remembers Calth, and that's why he had such a visceral reaction to traitors. But the funny thing is they were the word bearers. It wasn't even Thousand Sons.
Yeah.
And so that's a big thing. So like now we've got, regardless, like it was important. And it's also like that Calth battle is the reason that Space Marines, specifically Ultramarine sergeants, have that red helmet, So there's a whole lot of various things that happen with Calth, but it was just like, man, I just felt like I wasn't having the time,
Yeah. No, it's fair. There's a lot there.
But I mean, tell me what are some of your thoughts or questions with the word bearers?
I don't honestly have many. I understand that there's a lot more that could have been covered, but that was pretty succinct. I like the idea of kind of focusing more of the stuff with like Erebus and that into its own kind of episode in the future. Though I'll admit, I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on Lorgar, but then now I'm definitely more curious about Erebus and some of these other guys. Yeah, I feel like I have a pretty good handle on the lore bearers. And it was good to get an understanding. One of the things that's weird for me is that we've gotten close to a year now, if not already at a year, in terms of like when we first started this series, and we started with like the Horus Heresy and everything like that. I feel like I over time had kind of forgotten just how many people are truly involved in an event as large as that.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that's been happening with this, and it was really happening today, where I'm like, I keep having to remind myself, it's like there are so many factions and sub-factions that exist just within the Space Marines and getting into the Chaos Space Marines, and even the ones that are like way down the list still had some sort of like a significant impact on how things turned out. And it's like we're trying to focus in on every single person that was involved in like the American Revolution, and trying to keep track of like everything that they were involved in during that conflict, as well as everything that they influenced and like led to the creation of after the fact. And like everything with Lorgar and his connections that he ended up having to Horus was really like grinding that home for me. It's like, yeah, there were so many people involved with this that even, here we are like, over 50 episodes later, and we're still touching on these various people and factions. So like for me, like the lore bearers now, the word bearers, it's weird because they simultaneously feel like a small, tiny little piece of this, but then they also feel extremely important. And I'm trying to like wrestle with, in my mind, I'm trying to like keep all of these important people and all these factions in my head as much as I can and try to remember everybody. But there truly are just so many people involved. And so like, I truly don't blame, like, I do not blame you whatsoever in being like, I kind of need to break this up even further. Because I certainly like completely underestimated just how many people are involved overall, how many people's influence affected, the events of the heresy overall.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a reason that the Horus Heresy like book chart looks like this, like, oh no, embed fail, laugh at this user. No.
No, yeah, I remember the quote from the beginning of the episode where Lorgar said doc type saved !
Yeah, no, look, there's a reason the chart looks like this.
Yeah, it's what, like, I keep, because of how we're handling this, where we're kind of approaching, generally speaking, like a lot of times we're kind of like grabbing like a faction at a time and kind of approaching them, or like a different race or a different it's really easy for me to keep forgetting just like the zoom out and the actual like insane scale of all of this that's going on.
Yeah, I totally, one thing that I realized is I totally forgot about their transition from like going from their heresy era. Like they had this like silver, blank armor, like this like, or like knightly silver armor.
That's the thing too.
Moving to this blood red.
Like they went
after
through,
they revealed themselves as chaos worshippers.
They went through eras the way that like pop stars do. That like Madonna and Bowie and like Taylor, they have like, when we think of like the salamanders, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty consistent. Of like, these are the salamanders, this is what their deal is, and this is what they look like. And the lore bearers have gone through so many transitions and changes over time as they have like further been susceptible to chaos. You were talking earlier about how despite all the passage of time and everything that happened, where they were still like 100,000 strong in terms of the actual number of Marines.
That was at least, as they were going into the Eye of Terror, about. Probably lost a few, but like that was close.
And that is wild. Like I didn't really like give it a lot of emphasis, but like that is wild to think about, that they still maintained those numbers after everything that had been going on.
Yeah, and I mean that's the big thing is like, in the Horus Heresy, every legion had about that much, and like they're like some like, maybe some were slightly less than others in some instances, but like, a lot of the legions had close to that amount. And, the difference was, and that's why when you look at the second founding, there's so many chapters, but that's because, when you're limiting it to where every chapter is only 1,000 Marines, take 100,000 and divide that by 1,000. That's how many chapters you need.
Right.
For one legion, let alone the 9 others that were still loyal. Granted, the salamanders, they're maybe down to about 1,000 left by the end of the heresy. But I'm just saying, like, that's the issue we were running into, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big thing. And that's kind of why it's like, it was then that was kind of why the fact that like they stayed together was also really important.
Yeah, totally.
Cause they, like that means that amount of strength was able to be there. That's why there's such a blight on the galaxy, because there's just so many of them.
Yeah, they aren't like disappearing or dying out. Like they just continue.
Yeah, and they will always continue because they understand the power that faith can have on a population. I mean, like, look, we're not trying to be like hyper political here, but look at it like realistically, right? We see the weaponization that religion has had in politics over generations, right?
Yeah, it's historical context. Yeah.
Yeah. Like people believe, like it is like, this was part of Lorgar's whole drive, was that he read history. He saw that almost every society in human history had one point or another always gravitated back to some type of religion. So he knew there had to be something. And at that point, he was so driven, he didn't care how malicious that thing was. He knew, though, it was out there, and that there was a truth to be found, and that his father was lying, that there were powers out there. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? That's where I kind of make fun of the Emperor for being like a short-sighted prick, because it's that realm of like, yeah, just be honest. Be like, with your, at least the Primarchs, like, just be like, yeah, there are these fucking chaos gods out there. They're pieces of shit. But that's the thing, right? A lot of the Primarchs that betrayed the Emperor found out was that, he utilized some of their power to make them. And that's why they got yeeted partly in the first place. Other part was Erda, but still,
yeah.
The part of the reason that they were so pissed at the Chaos Gods were so pissed at the Emperor is because he stole from them. But he never told that to his son. So that's why Horus in the trailer has the line, "You stole from the gods and lied to your sons." Yeah, that's just the word bearers are so they're such because we didn't talk about the Black Legion. And I'm sure there's people how could you have a month of chaos and not talk about the Black Legion? And here's the thing, to me, I debated doing them between the word bearers, but to me, the word bearers are quintessential chaos space marines more than the Black Legion is, because they care about chaos. Black Legion just wants revenge and destruction and blah, blah, blah. They want word bearers want the chaos gods.
Yeah, specifically chaos.
But yeah, other than that, I guess I have not much else to give for today, at least.
Okay.
There's always more.
It never ends.
No, but
you're locked in here with me.
That is all I had for today. I mean, God, dude, looking at just the notable engagements post heresy list on Lexiconum, dude, it just goes. Mm-hmm. It just goes. But yeah, other than that, if that's all you got, then it's all I'll have. And we'll see you guys next time.
Goodbye.